I'm the vice chair del Partido de la Raza Unida, Ernesto Ayala. Um, we put together this presentation, because I think it's very timely with everything that's going on. Our histories that we see in commonality with the heroic people of Palestine, the heroic nation of Palestine. And that's something, let's keep in mind as we go with this presentation. Palestine is a nation, and that is what they're fighting for. Um, so let's get started. Let me just I will share my screen. Share. Y luego we got live on YouTube. Media. Okay, México. All right. Okay, México. If everybody could be on mute, por favor. Alrighty, compañeras y compañeros. So here's the beginning. We're starting the presentation. Made it look like it's the postcards without we see. Are people getting some feedback or is it okay? Alrighty, compañeras y compañeros. So here's as we see here, the first one has our esteemed hero, leader, and example of Chicanismo, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, who was a leader in the Crusade for Justice in Denver, Colorado. And he was also a leader in the Partido de la Raza Unida. He was actually, we were talking before, but he was the one that pushed that the La Raza Unida should have an ideology, and they split. And the people that kept organizing followed with example of Corky. And he's walking from this mural in the barrio there in Denver, and it says, "To kill is bad enough, but to kill your own gente is to kill la raza." And then it has the image there, with an indigenous symbol, and it's the Che on one side, right there. You can see Che Guevara, and then the UFW flag, which for a moment started becoming a symbol of all Chicanos, for all Chicanos. On the bottom or on the right side, we see a very similar picture. That's why I chose to put these two pictures. A Palestinian person, I couldn't find out who this person is. But they're also in their neighborhood, in their barrio, and they're walking in front of a mural that has a common, a similar sentiment of nationalism. We love our land. We will fight. So the people of Palestine will fight for their land. And again, I want to acknowledge everybody. Gracias for joining us, ¿verdad? There's people from all over right now, ¿verdad? Other partido members, mechistas, people in the community. Gracias for taking time and joining us. I think this is a very important topic that we need to talk about. So to begin with, what we need to understand, ¿verdad, is that what happens in Palestine, what's happening in Palestine, it's not just, random events. It's not just, people being attacked and they don't know what to do. The Palestinian people are organized. They have been organizing for a very long time, since they were colonized in the 1940s. And the main organization to come out of those efforts is called the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was founded on June 2nd, 1964. The PLO is a Frente type of organization, which means it's composed of various organizations with similar ideological goals. And their ideology of the PLO in total is um, the goal of the liberation of Palestine. So you have different organizations there. Some are religious, some are Marxist Leninist, but they're all united under the goal to free Palestine. This is from their Palestinian National Charter, um, Article 1. And take these things into account. Let's when we're seeing them, think about what we've heard about Chicanismo or about Aztlan, all these concepts. Article 1, Palestine is the homeland of the Arab Palestinian people. It is an indivisible part of the Arab homeland, and the Palestinian people are an integral part of the Arab nation. And take into account this right here, right? Um, because I think this is something important that we need to understand how history happens, ¿verdad? Uh, Article 2, Palestine, with the boundaries it had during the British Mandate, is an indivisible territorial unit. And then on the bottom, it says the British Mandate was a declaration in which the League of Nations, Europeans, colonizers, gave administrative control of the land of Palestine and Transjordan to Britain. So, in other words, a lot of times we hear as Chicanos, Baraslan, it's colonial, this, and why are you upholding, colonial borders? They might be colonial borders, but out of that have grown legitimate nations, have grown legitimate people. Palestinians are a perfect example of that. They are saying here that those boundaries that were put on their land by the British Mandate is their land. It is where Palestinians have developed out of, and so they are fighting for that land. That is their land. Article 8, the phase in their history through which the Palestinian people are now living is that of national struggle for the liberation of Palestine. And listen to this. I mean, because this is something that, as in the Chicano movement, we need to really learn. Thus, the conflicts among the Palestinian national forces are secondary and should be ended for the sake of the basic conflict that exists between the forces of Zionism and of imperialism on the one hand, and the Palestinian Arab people on the other. On this basis, the Palestinian masses, regardless of whether they are residing in the national homeland or in diaspora, constitute both their organizations and individuals one national front working for the retrieval of Palestine and its liberation through armed struggle. So let's read that again, the highlighted part, because I think that's something that we need to understand. We need to take into account. Thus, the conflicts among the Palestinian national forces are secondary and should be ended for the sake of the basic conflict that exists between the forces of Zionism and of imperialism on the one hand and the Palestinian Arab people on the other. What is the main problem affecting the Palestinian people? Is it that they might have differences between themselves? Is it that they might have, they might not totally agree on what to do? No. The main issue, the main contradiction is that Zionism, is that Israel is squatting, is occupying their land. So they understand that that is the main thing that they must focus on. Everything else becomes secondary. Everything. Let's learn from that, compañeros, compañeras. And this is a quote from their founder, Yasser Arafat. And again, I think this is very important and to reflect on as Chicanos. I can say that we have defeated the enemy plan that staked all on the disillusion, listen, the disillusion of the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian people. In fact, the Palestinian identity has been reasserted in its most distinct and definite form. And our Palestinian Arab people are not only conscious of their national identity, but also embody it in their daily activities. Although more than half of them have been forcibly deprived of the right to live. in their land, while the remainder have been deprived of the possibility of expressing their identity. What is he saying with this? He's saying that they have already won. Why? Because they have kept their Palestinian identity. Every Palestinian knows who they are, whether they're young, they're old, an elderly person, whether they're man, they're woman, whether they're straight or they're queer. They know that they are first and foremost Palestinian, and that's what the Zionists, the occupiers, the colonizers, they haven't been able to defeat them because they all know. I mean, look at what they're going through right now. I mean, they've been going through this for 70, 80 years, but what they're going through right now is amongst the worst. But they can't defeat them. The Palestinian people continue to be resilient. Why? Because they understand their identity. They understand that they are Palestinian, and nothing can change that. They understand that. And think about for us, the time that we most moved, that we most were able to engage in our own history and develop our own path was when the majority of us, or a greater number of us, understood that we were what? Chicanas y Chicanos. And that's what we call the Chicano power period. Identity is important to a colonized people. Now on to our organization, el Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida. In 1969, at the Chicano Youth Liberation Conference, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, leader of the Crusade for Justice in Colorado, calls for the creation of an independent Chicano political party and the need for developing Chicano nationalism as an ideological tool for liberation. Although the idea already existed, it is here that Corky and the Crusade call for Aztlan as our homeland. And on the bottom it says the idea that Chicanos originated from Aztlan already existed prior to this conference, the Chicano Youth Liberation Conference. But it was first put into text by Jack Forbes, Powhatan Renape. He was a professor. He actually worked at CISO for a bit. And this paper was called The Mexican Heritage of Aztlan, written in 1962. And later on, it was added as a piece to a book, a very important book that I have another quote from that book here in this presentation. It's called Aztecas del Norte. It's out of print. Supposedly, they're gonna print it again next year, I believe. I've heard. Pero I said there's a PDF copy out there in the interwebs. I have it. If people want a copy, I can email it to you or wherever, but I can send it to you. But yeah, it's a very important book. If people can ever read that text. Founded in 1970 after school walkouts in Cristal City, Texas, La Raza Unida sweeps elections in various towns, challenging the dominant white power structure in place since 1848. And that there's Jose Ángel Gutiérrez when he was a young man. On the left is the original symbol of La Raza Unida, and left of that on the top is the current one that we have. In 1972, La Raza Unida Party holds a national convention, drawing in 3,000 Chicanas y Chicanos. And that's a historic picture there with some of the leaders of the partido. In 1974, since the beginning, the mujeres' participation was central to La Raza Unida Party. Chicanas took several key positions with 36% of county chairs by 1972. Las Mujeres por la Raza Unida and la Federación de Mujeres de la Raza Unida were formed. And it was a statewide conference held in 1974 in Texas. On the right, that's a cover of La Raza magazine. And that's Doreen Garcia Neville, who's she's an elder compañera, ¿verdad? But she's still active in her capacity, ¿verdad? Much respect to her and her son, who's obviously a grown man. Other images of compañeras. And, this part of the presentation obviously is to show that, Chicanos as well have been organizing for our liberation. Different images of compañeras. Irma Mireles, who was a leader in the partido in Texas. La Conferencia de Mujeres por la Raza, conference they held. And then here on the bottom right, you can see all these sisters very much engaged in the convention that we spoke about just a little few seconds ago. Um, and I think it's important because it's important to hear about this because there's um, a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of confusion out there on purpose to make it seem as if mujeres were never a part of the movimiento or were uh, excluded. And not that none of that ever did not happen. It did happen, you know, pero I think this is an example of how the mujeres, at least in the partido, have always understood that this was their partido. There was actually an occurrence at that convention where the mujeres, they walked out and they said, you know what, we're equals in this. And we're talking about la raza, that means everybody, not just the hombres. You know, we're here, we can think as much as you can. We could, you know, discuss and debate as much as you can. We're not just here as secretaries or cooks or whatever, you know. And the sisters, they didn't leave La Raza Unida. They fought for La Raza Unida as their organization, which it is their organization. You know, so I think that's something important. I know that that event has been told in another way on the internet and social media, ¿verdad? Or social media is internet. But I think the fact remains that the sisters fought to make La Raza Unida. They didn't fight to separate from La Raza Unida. They fought to make La Raza Unida be what it says and claim to be. And that can be, I'm confident and I'm proud to say that the Partido has always followed that path in my lifetime. Since the beginning, there was no ideological definition of who or what La Raza Unida stood for. This began to cause a split between those that believed all Chicanos and Raza had to do was vote and run brown candidates, and those that understood that we had to completely determine our own destiny as a people. In other words, build for self-determination. Self-determination. That we control our communities, that we control our barrios, that we control everything that affects our lives, that we control it, that it is run by our interest as a people. That is what self-determination is. That's what Palestinians are fighting for. 1975, at the Puerto Rico Libre Conference in Mexico, DF Jose Ángel Gutiérrez steps down as chair at the request of the Congreso de Aztlan. And my father was part of that Congreso, and he was there when they asked him to step down. He probably would not admit to that, but that did occur. There was more than one witness. Juan Jose Peña becomes chair, and Maria Elena Martinez becomes the vice chair. That was in Mexico City. It is in the 1980s that La Raza Unida matures into a serious revolutionary nationalist organization. It defines its ideology as Chicano revolutionary nationalism, guided by scientific socialism. It develops relationships with other peoples and struggles domestically and internationally. Revolutionary nationalism, you know, basically that we understand, one, that we are a nation of people, La Raza, Chicanos, indigenous people, but it doesn't end there. We are a part of a much larger struggle, uh, and not only on our continent, but in throughout the world of colonized, oppressed, and working class peoples to overcome what's been forced on us and create a new society. That's where the revolutionary comes from, and we are guided by scientific socialism. Genaro Ayala becomes chair. That is my father. And Ayala makes developing Chicano revolutionary nationalism a prime focus of the partido. In other words, we need an ideology. Ideology is your ideas, what guides you, how you believe the world works. You know, a lot of people like to say, "I don't have an ideology." Yes, you do, because you have a perception of how the world works and what you need to do in that world to survive. That's your ideology. Every organization has an ideology, even when they say they don't. This society has an ideology: capitalism, colonialism, impose yourself. That's their ideology. They don't have to tell you that, but that's what they reflect in the schools, in the media, and everything. They are showing their ideology, the ideology of the ruling class. And here's some images, ¿verdad, of the Raza Unida participating with different peoples domestically and internationally at African Liberation Day with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, sitting there under the banner, like right under the star. That's my dad, Genaro Ayala. In Mexico with the Partido Socialista de los Trabajadores in their General Assembly. And again, that's my dad right there, the arrow pointing at him. And there's people from all over the world there. Taking self-determination as a serious task, it is also during this time that the Partido, now PNLRU, Partido Nacional La Raza Unida, develops a working relationship with the International Indian Treaty Council. The International Indian Treaty Council supports the creation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project and formally recognizes Chicanos as indigenous to the spiritual land of Aztlan, as one of many indigenous nations that the United States has warred against and broken treaties with. This is important, Raza, because this is part of the history that sometimes we won't even get in Chicano studies. This is part of the history that goes past the 70s, where Chicanas kept organizing for our self-determination, kept organizing La Raza Unida, and some of the achievements that we did, that we had, and I say we, because I was born in 81, but I was still a baby, but it's we as a people, we as the partido, the history that we have, that we've done, but it's erased, it's hidden from you, so that then later on, decades later, you hear some of the ignorance that you hear online to confuse you, Raza. Here is a letter that was written directly to my father, who was a chair at that time. It was written by Mr. Bill Wapepa. He was the director of the International Indian Treaty Conference, and he was Kikapu Nation, Kikapu people. And it's, just a quote from right there, ¿verdad? Pero he says, I wish to express our commitment to an ongoing relationship of mutual solidarity with La Raza Unida Party. AIM, the American Indian Movement, and the International Indian Treaty Council wholeheartedly support the Chicano struggle for self-determination, which La Raza Unida Party represents. We see it as one of the indigenous struggles for sovereignty and self-determination in this hemisphere. Listen to that, compañeras and compañeros. Listen to that. We've had this unity. We've understood that we are one people, but it's been erased, even from the books. It's been erased. It's been hidden. This is another document that was also sent from the International Indian Treaty Council. And listen to what it says here. I presented this information because it's leading up to something, but it's also should clarify a lot of the ignorance that is out there, that is weakening a lot of the fighting force that we could have as a people. But here it goes, it says this: in recent years, the International Indian Treaty Council has sought a means to bridge relations to include the Chicano indigenous people among the family of nations. The utilization of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project as a catalyst for reunification has helped toward this purpose. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project is an ongoing research and development component of the International Indian Treaty Council since 1980 in Fort Belknap, Montana, at the 6th International Indian Treaty Council Conference. At that time, listen, Raza, at that time, the General Assembly of the International Indian Treaty Conference unanimously acknowledged the Chicano indigenous peoples and the spiritual land of Aztlan. Already, we understood this. Already, we have known that we are home, that we are part of this land. And doesn't mean negating any of our other raza, because our tribal people, that's our raza. Not negating any of their struggles or their experience, but it's saying we as a whole, colonialism has divided us, but we are fighting for the same thing. We are fighting for the land. And they said it there, you are part of this. We understand that you are a part of this. So I have here this quote, right? Because this compañera here was not, she's not Chicana or Mexicana. She was actually from Chile. But I think this quote kind of says what we're trying to get to here, right? And it says this: it is necessary to study the history of our countries to know the specific characteristics of our social formations, to study what defines our economic structure, the forms in which the different relations of production are combined, which relation dominates, what are the strong and weak points of this structure, to study the ideological structure, the dominant ideas among the masses, to study the structure of power, the internal contradictions of this power, etc. This study of our concrete social formations, reality, must be realized through the gathering of the greatest amount of data concerning this reality, critically analyzed in light of the general principles of Marxist-Leninism in order to obtain correct conclusions. In other words, you got to understand, you got to study every aspect of what you claim you're presenting on. You got to study it all. You got to, have the fullest picture that you can, so that when you make an opinion, it's the most it's the uh advised, the most read and understood opinion, not just say stuff because you can, which unfortunately happens a lot on social media. Um, this quote here was said way more directly and bluntly by in the following slide by another compañero that a lot of us here might know. No investigation, no right to speak. So the point of this, again, the point of this, ¿verdad, is to, we built up to this, ¿verdad? We just talked about Palestinians, their organizations. Now we talked about Chicanos and our organization. And it's all to show that in 1980, the Palestine Liberation Organization invited delegates from La Raza Unida Party to meet in Beirut, Lebanon. And there's this picture right here. The right wing used to show this in the early 2000s to scare the pants off everybody, but it only made a lot of Chicanos proud. That's the delegation. I've known some of these people. The person in the middle, that's Yasser Arafat, the man that was the founder of the PLO, and the quote we showed. That's them. They couldn't enter exactly into Palestine at that moment, so they met in Lebanon. And this is a quote from a compañera that was in that delegation, Rebecca Hill. She was from Nuevo Mexico. We felt that we both had the same fight. They learned about our struggle, that Chicanos were being thrown out of their homeland. So they invited us on a fact-finding mission so we could come back and tell the story that there are two sides to every story. To tell the world that there are two sides to every story. And then this quote is from Daniel Osuna. Um, he was also there, and he's also recently been involved, still in the partido. Two things that Arafat said. One, we need to remember that people are the ultimate resource, not money. And two, we need to break the barrier of fear. A lot of people are in fear. A lot of people are in fear. We need to break that. We need to break that. Chicanos, like Palestinians, are a people displaced of their land by a settler invasion. Chicanos developed out of the U.S. invasion of Mexico and sections of the indigenous people, some already identifying as Mexican at that point, still residing here after the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. After U.S. occupation of the northernmost half of then Mexico, the U.S. begins land theft of native nations who had resisted Spanish occupation, and some even the nascent Mexican government who was ruled by Criollos. The U.S. also begins land theft through coercive legal means, such as taking land grants from people who held them. And I have this quote directly from the Tatavium website, the Tatavium, for all the LA and San Fernando Valley Raza here. Probably already know the Tatavium are the indigenous tribe here of San Fernando and Santa Clarita valleys. This is directly from their website, and it shows it shows a lot, what we're talking about, because respectfully, a lot of the people from these tribes, they are Chicanos as well. You could even argue they are the original Chicanos, ¿verdad? The original even Mexicanos of this land. But this is directly from their website, ¿verdad? And it's showing how this land was lost. Siutcanga, which is present day Encino. Some of you all know maybe a bit about LA. Encino is an area that is not known for indigenous people nowadays. It's known for very wealthy colonizers and other capitalists and their big mansions and all that. It says Los Encinos State Historic Park is located at the native village of Siutcanga, meaning the place of the oaks, from which over 75% of the Fernandeño Tatavian Band of Mission Indians descends. The natural spring provided a year-round source of water for our ancestors for thousands of years. In the Mexican period, our ancestors received the Rancho Encino land grant under Mexican trust and protection. However, the land was lost just several years later in the American period due to sharp business practices of a neighboring Spaniard named Vicente de la Osa, a white man, obviously. Today, you can visit the historic Adobe Garnier Building, natural spring water, and see the well-known traditional trade route now known as Ventura Boulevard. And then it has the address there. And then right here, I have this quote, which I think is very exemplary of what we are talking about. As Chicanos, um, we've gone through a lot of phases, ¿verdad? And what we're currently seeing right now, ¿verdad, is nothing new, ¿verdad? This has already occurred uh, in our history. And I think this quote here, ¿verdad, is very important. It shows how we've already been through similarities in our past, ¿verdad, that have gone on to make us who we are today. Just like the Palestinians, they haven't always been the same people. They have developed out of colonialism. ¿Verdad? So sorry, the computer's blocking a little bit of what it says here. Pero, here we go. It's from Aztecas del Norte, obviously. Analco, the birthplace of the Chicano. On August 15th, 1680, armed Native American rebels of the Tano, Tewa, Taos, Picuris, Jemes, and Apache nations entered Analco, the Mexican Nahuatl or Aztec barrio next to Santa Fe in New Mexico. A Tano leader met with Governor Otermin of the Spaniards and told him that the rebels carried two banners, one bearing red and the other white. The red symbolized the war, which the Spaniards could choose, while the white symbolized the peace, which would prevail if the European invaders agreed to abandon New Mexico. The Indian freedom fighters asked that all classes of Indians who are in our power, says Otermin in a letter of 1680, be given up to them, both those in the service of the Spaniards and those of the Mexican nation of that suburb of Analco. He demanded also that his wife and children be given up to him, and likewise that all the Apache men and women whom the Spaniards had captured in war be turned over to them, inasmuch as some Apaches who were among them were asking for them. We must be grateful that Otermin wrote that down, because it tells so much about the history of the Chicano and of the ancient unity of La Raza Indígena, the indigenous race. Here we not only see that the Pueblo and Apache freedom fighters were concerned about the liberation of their Mexican brothers from Spanish tyranny, but listen, compañeros, we also see that the Indian town of Analco was already pan-Indian, with Apache, Pueblo, and Mexican servants and slaves all living together under the common yoke of the European oppressor. Is it not from this common oppression that the Chicano has been born? An Indian with no tribe, an Indian of many tribes, or a mestizo born of the rape of his Indian mother? Is that not what we have been born from, Raza? Look at us, a new people. We are a new people with ancient roots. There are Chicanos that descend from Central America. There are Chicanos that descend from Mexico. There are Chicanos that descend from the native nations of what we call Aztlan. There are Chicanos that are half. There are Chicanos that are Pinoy, Filipino. There are Chicanos that are mixed, with these different groups. Um, but we are all Chicanos living under the common oppression of the European oppressor, the common yoke of the European oppressor. Is that not who we are? Move forward. Here we go. And this is already dated, but that's a map showing the population of quote unquote Latinos, La Raza, in our own terms, except for Florida. But there is Raza there, by the way. Um, but that might look familiar to you. Our spread, our geographical spread might look very familiar. And then this is a quote from Juan Gonzalez after Trump was defeated. And not that we obviously are not supporting Democrats or Republicans, obviously, but it is a telling quote. And he had to say this, Juan Gonzalez from Democracy Now. And what has happened now is that there is a new brown belt voting bloc that is developing in the Southwest that includes Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Nuevo Mexico, and very soon Texas as well. And obviously California is already part of it. So it's showing how politically there's a section of the country that has its own political interests. Think of that. There's this maybe some of you all already seen this. This is the 2023 came out last year. US Latino GDP report. This is not something put out by the Chicano movement, take into account. But this is directly from this report on who US Latinos would be. And this is directly their quote. Like I just copied and pasted what they said there. If Latinos in the United States were an independent country, the researchers found their GDP, their domestic product, would be the world's fifth largest, outpacing even the United Kingdom, France, and India among the 10 largest GDPs in the world. That's us. The US Latino GDP grew at the second fastest rate across 2020 and 2021. Only China's GDP grew faster. Despite being only 19% of the US population, Latinos were responsible for 39% of the growth of US real GDP during 2020 and 2021. Look at that, raza. Look at that. They themselves are saying if Latinos in the US were an independent country, we would be the world's fifth largest economy. That's all the people that you know of, your family, your raza, your friends, your neighborhood, your parents, your grandparents, all the people out in the fields, picking all those fruits, growing all the food, but attending to all the crops. That's all the people building the cities. That's all the raza in the service sector and all these stores. All these people, all this mass of millions and millions of Chicanos and Chicanas and Mexicanos and Mexicanas and even Centroamericanos here in this land. We ourselves, by their own words, are the fifth largest economy. If we only knew that. But that's what we're saying, right? What does the enemy say? What do these people that rule over us say in relation to this topic? You might be surprised by some of the stuff. This is directly from this disgusting person's mouth, but it holds a lot of truth. This is from a book he wrote. You could actually buy the book, but I have the quote here for you. That's Tlaloc in the background trying to give the presentation as well. But this is what he had to say. Listen what he's saying. The United States is not exempt from this potential nightmare. And he's talking about Palestinians, right? In a decade or two, the southwestern region of America is likely to be predominantly Hispanic, raza. mainly as a result of continuous immigration from Mexico. It is not inconceivable that in this community, champions of the Palestinian principle could emerge. These would demand not merely equality before the law or naturalization, or even Spanish as a first language. Instead, they would say that since they form a local majority in the territory, which was forcibly taken from Mexico in the War of 1848, they deserve a state of their own. But you already have a state. It's called Mexico, would come the response. You have every right to demand civil rights in the United States, but you have no right to demand a second Mexico, Aztlan. This hypothetical exchange may sound far-fetched today, but it will not necessarily appear that way tomorrow, especially if the Palestinian principle is allowed to continue to spread, which it surely will if a new Palestinian state comes into being. This is directly from the mouth of this monster. They understand who we are, Raza. Do we? This is another quote from Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington, maybe some of you all, I know we read this in the study group before. Maybe you all have heard about him, but Samuel Huntington, he was not just some guy that wrote a book. He was he worked for the Johnson administration. You know, he was an advisor for all these different presidential administrations. He was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission. Um, and so he published, you know, he was in all these think tanks, so he published his work, right? He said this in this document, you can find it online. It's called the Hispanic Challenge. It came out in 2009. Listen again to what these people have to say. The persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into two peoples, two cultures, and two languages. Unlike past immigrant groups, Mexicans and other Latinos have not assimilated into mainstream US culture, forming instead their own political and linguistic enclaves. No other immigrant group in US history has asserted or could assert a historical claim to US territory. Mexicans and Mexican Americans can and do make that claim. Almost all of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah were part of Mexico until Mexico lost them as a result of the Texan War of Independence in 1835 to 1836 and the Mexican American War of 1846 to 48. Mexico is the only country that the United States has invaded, occupied its capital, placing the Marines in the halls of Montezuma, and then annexed half its territory. Mexicans do not forget these events. Quite understandably, they feel that they have special rights in these territories. Unlike other immigrants, Boston College political scientist Peter Scarry notes, Mexicans arrive here from a neighboring nation that has suffered military defeat at the hands of the United States, and they settle predominantly in a region that was once part of their homeland. Mexican Americans enjoy a sense of being on their own turf that is not shared by other immigrants. They're not saying Chicanos, they're not saying Aztlan, but they're saying it in other words. There's another quote. This is a tweet, now an X, by again this disgusting monster. President Trump is right. I built a wall along Israel's southern border. It stopped all illegal immigration. Great success, great idea. Look at how they're thinking, how they think. This here is I got it from it sounds scary, but I took the risk. I went on the CIA website and I looked up because you could search stuff in there. So I took the L for the raza and I looked up Chicano. This is one of the things that I found. This is a there used to be this journal that people could read, but like intelligence people, you know, people in the CIA, FBI, and whatever in other countries that is a similar thing. Um, and look what it says here. This is an article, verdad, that is highly censored, but this was the only part because it had a piece of the journal which was all blacked out, and then it ends there. This page here that I included, it doesn't go further. Like it just ends right there. Northern Ireland too, and that's it. And then it talks about some other stuff. But it says, look what it says here, that they are saying, these people are saying, they've been saying it. There are significant signs to the contrary. The July 1980 issue of Intelligence Digest World Report contained the following passage. We have for some considerable time now warned about the politicizing of the Mexicans within the US and the claims for lost and stolen Mexican lands. So you will not be unduly surprised to learn that a Washington, D.C. School board official has asked that one of the American held hostages in Iran be released because he is a Chicano, and that Chicanos are Mexicans who have lived under the yoke of U.S. imperial aggression and occupation since the land was stolen from Mexico in 1836 and 1846. For 200 years, the Latin American countries have experienced the same kind of U.S. domination and control that Iran experienced between 53 and 79. As fellow victims of U.S. greed and racism, Iran and the Latino community must learn more about one another and stand together. And then it says in special brief number 75, Flashpoints of the World, we of course covered Ireland, but we also showed how Mexico could claim Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, together with part of Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, and the Oklahoma Panhandle. We then commented, there are some 8 to 10 million illegal immigrants within the United States, most of them Mexican, and the president of Mexico has already indicated that the illegals must be treated properly. The Mexicans are deeply aware of the cultural heritage and of what the Europeans, Americans, and Spanish have done to them. And then it goes on about Mexican oil power. And again, this is in their own words. We're not making this up. This is not from a Chicano studies book. This is again, this was online, but on their own website. And as you can see on top, I don't know if you can see it, but that other little highlighted circle right there says talks about the PLO, and then it's talking also about Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, as many have called them, are the Chicanos of Europe. You know, they're also fighting for their land from British colonialism. And now look at this. This also is from their own words. I didn't know that Playboy magazine, if people remember that magazine, had good articles in it. Um, and this is directly from that. When asked on a Playboy magazine interview, July 1978, what was the greatest threat to America today? This is what then CIA Director William Colby had to say. The most obvious threat is that there are 60 million Mexicans today, and there are going to be 120 million of them by the end of the century. There are 7 million or 8 million Mexicans who live in the United States today, and of the extra 60 million who will be around by the end of the century. There's no way to keep a good 20 million of them from living in the country. We can reinforce the border patrol, and they don't have enough bullets to stop them all. This is from their own mouths, Raza. This is the director, the former director of the CIA. This is what they've been putting in, what they put allowed to be put in public. They have been saying this. And now this is I added this, because I think uh we've seen some of these attacks online. We've seen some of these claims online regarding Chicanismo, regarding Aztlan. Um, and in relation to Palestinians, if you see some of the propaganda, some of the Zionist propaganda that's out there, and you understand it in this context, you see it in this context, I think you'll have a bigger understanding of what's going on. This guy here, he's the son of the founder of Hamas. He's Palestinian, but he works for the Zionists. So they have one of a Palestinian person working for them. You should listen to some of the stuff he says, because a lot of the raza that are saying stuff against their own raza, their raza, but whose words are they repeating? Listen to what this guy said. If anybody can see this interview, if you all follow Abby Martin online, this is from her. It just came out, I think, last week. It's called Abby Martin Calls Out Israeli Spy on Piers Morgan. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, none of it is real, including Palestine. It's only in your head. Palestine was never born. How can you free it? It was never there. It's just a colonial entity. And some people choose to make it into a national identity. Does that sound familiar? That's from that guy's mouth. Now let's go on to the next slides, which are generally just stuff that found online. ¿Verdad? Comments regarding, well, the first set are comments and posts, Zionist propaganda, about Palestinians, and listen to what they say, and think about the stuff you hear about Chicanos. Look at that right there. The French left Africa, the British left India, the Spaniards left South America, the Dutch left Indonesia. When will Arab Muslims leave the lands they colonized? So now Arabs are colonizers? Then this other one. Why do all the neo-Nazis support the Palestinian cause? Someone corrected it by putting Ukrainian. But now Palestinians are Nazis or sympathetic to Nazis. This other one down here, all the lands that were conquered or ever ruled by Muslims, millions were killed, hundreds of thousands were enslaved, several indigenous cultures and civilizations were wiped out. Arab Muslims invented colonialism centuries before Europeans. So now Palestinians and Arab people are colonizers in their own land. Does that sound familiar, Vasa? And look at this other one right here. Any Arab Muslim living outside of this area is a colonizer. Over here, more stuff. Netanyahu, Adolf Hitler didn't want to kill the Jews, but a Muslim convinced him to do it. And then who are the real colonizers in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? There are 2 million Nazis in the West Bank, says far-right finance minister. And again, look at this other one over here. Jews and Samaritans are the indigenous people of Israel. Maronites, Melkite Christians, and Druze are the indigenous people of Lebanon. Coptic Christians are the indigenous people of Egypt. Assyrian Christians are the indigenous people of Syria. Assyrian Christians, Yazidis, and Mandians are the indigenous people of Iraq. Arab Muslims are not indigenous to any of these countries. Does that sound familiar? And now, this is some of the stuff you hear regarding Chicanos. This image over here, that it's actually a document, the Nazi propagandists behind La Raza, Mexican nationalism. I put that there because this is actually a document that some memes were made out of this document and were being shared online by some of these Latinx woke social media influence people, saying that La Raza, all this stuff. I mean, you can see it there. That the reason Chicanos say this is because we're sympathetic, whether we know or not, to Nazis and all that. Look at some of these comments here. Some of these comments are in response to when I did this presentation at Rearte, Centro Literario, which if anybody in the LA area should support the sister. It's a good space right there in Boyle Heights. Remember, Latinos, Mexican, and Chicano centers uphold Eurocentrism and white supremacy as well. Aztlan is a neo-colonizer reference and flat-out cultural appropriation. You aren't Mexican, etc., etc. Aztlan is a fake settler colonial myth. Hope this helps. That awkward moment when Aztlan is a fake settler colonial concept based on Euro-colonial eugenics. So now Chicanos are into eugenics, supposedly, and we're all these horrible things, just like Palestinians are being framed in that way by their colonizer on social media. This is a quote from Congressman Ted Poe in 2006. And there was a lot of people in government talking this way in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. Mr. Speaker, the United States is under attack. And like December 7th, 1941, we are asleep on a Sunday morning. The reason, Mr. Speaker, is because this nation is under attack by another nation. We are being invaded. We are being colonized. And there are insurgents from the nation of Mexico and their allies further south. And then the next one is from this other article that came out during the MEPA time when they were they fought to change the name of Mecha. Uh, Cruz's criticisms and those of other student leaders target these visions of Aztlan as themselves implicated in colonialism, racism, patriarchy, heterosexism, ableism, and transphobia. So all of a sudden, this idea of liberation becomes all these horrible things. And sometimes you ask people and they won't explain to you how, but they just are. So the Chicano Mexicano slash La Raza and the Palestinian people are two separate peoples with similar histories of resistance to occupation. Chicanos, like the Palestinian people, are indigenous peoples born as distinct and relatively new nations by the carving of colonial borders upon their homelands. Yes, these borders are colonial, but out of that have grown a legitimate people, a legitimate nation, a new people with ancient roots, just like the Palestinians have their ancient roots in Palestine. So do Chicanos here in this land, whether we call her Aztlan or whatever we may call her. But we have our roots here, and we grow out of that colonization when we become a legitimate people. That's the history of all humanity. Like the Palestinians, the Chicano struggle for self-determination can cause a serious blow to U.S. imperialism. Palestinian independence. Palestinian independence would mean the withering away of Israel, which would signify the waning of U.S. hegemony in the Middle East, or what is called the Middle East by them, right? Chicano indigenous independence in Aztlan would signify the withering away of the United States settler state domestically and U.S. imperialism internationally. Both Chicanos and Palestinians are condemned to violent oppression and genocide, either physically or culturally, in order to maintain the status quo. They need to do all this to us, just like the Zionists need to do the horrible things they're doing to the Palestinian people right now, bombing Gaza, bombing the West Bank, doing all this horrible. They have to do that to survive. Everything that our raza goes through here, the United States has to do that for them to survive, including confusing our people from our national identity, including all this attacks on Chicano ethnic studies, gentrification, anti quote unquote immigrant hysteria, which is just anti Mexican hysteria, anti indigenous hysteria, the prison industrial complex, ICE, Border Patrol, the police departments all serve to, in one way or another, subjugate La Raza to colonial authorities and erase our national identity and consciousness. Raza, we are linked with the Palestinian people in our struggle. Again, if the Palestinian people are independent, that means Israel is becoming part of the history books. If Chicanos, if La Raza, if Aztlan becomes independent, that means the United States domestically is withering away and will no longer be. And that means that their power worldwide would wane. And they have said it themselves. We are the fifth largest economy. We are the only people that claim have numbers and claim the land. We are this and we are that. That we are the greatest threat to the United States. They have said it themselves, Raza. They know it. The problem is, do we? Do we know it? So we must build nation. We must build national identity. We must build pride in who we are. We must build our culture. We must join La Raza Unida. Join La Raza Unida, compañeros y compañeras. Now is the time. There's a lot of things that we are organizing. One of the main things that we are doing is the plebiscite. And with the plebiscite, we do aim to build nation. What the plebiscite is like a national vote. We are running our own elections. Not Republican, not Democrat. If people want to vote for them, go for it. That's up to you. But if you could vote for them, you can vote on these issues. We are putting out issues that came out of some studies that we did when we had groups of people. We asked groups of people, nation. Yes, focus groups. I forgot that word. Gracias. I always forget it. We had focus groups about a year ago, and out of there came, what are issues that Raza in general feel are a priority, and we're gonna make some policy. We're gonna propose some policy and put that out there for the Raza to vote. It'll be online. Most of it will probably be online, but we want to do that to show that as a people we do have a consciousness. we do have interests that link us together, ¿verdad? That show that we are thinking politically, even though we're not thinking that we are, but we are. So get involved with the partido, compañeros y compañeras. Y gracias. Here, let me go back here. Say that we are thinking politically, even though we're not thinking that we are, that we are. Here, let me, que viva la raza. A ver. I am going to stop recording this.